Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for tuning in again to Procrastinator's Pit Stop. I am sitting here with another amazing guest for you today. Today, we have with us Shermin or Cher Cruz, and she is an author, TEDx producer, speaker, and law professor whose forthcoming book, Stoic Empathy, combines stoic resilience with emotional intelligence, drawing from her journey as an Iranian immigrant turned successful lawyer to help leaders and organizations navigate high pressure decisions and master human connection. Cher, well, show.
Thank you, Chris. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks very much for coming on the show. We have a lot of interesting ground we can cover today. Before we do, though, we do like to have an icebreaker on the show. And the question for you today is which cartoon character do you resonate with the most and why?
Well, I love this. And I was mentioning this to you during our pre show chit chat that I'm a mom of four kids. They're all a little bit older now. The oldest are 14-year-old twins, but young enough still that cartoon characters are my jam. And this one is very easy for me. I would definitely be Elena of Avalor. And I don't know if all of your listeners slash viewers would know what that is. So if it's okay with you, can I take 30 seconds to tell you who Elena of Avalor is? Okay. So Elena of Avalor is a Latina princess who is very feminine, but also kind of a warrior. And like very, very good with yielding a sword and not, has slightly darker skin. So I'm not Latina, but I see myself in her because I am I present very feminine. I wear a lot of dresses, but I can hold my own on in a street fight. And so I really liked that combination of factors. And then I also like that she has a younger sister. I have two younger sisters, and I have a very, very intense soulmate type relationship with my younger siblings. And so I really enjoy, because a lot of female characters are only children, a lot of cartoon characters as a general matter, because it becomes too complex for the cartoon to give them siblings.
I like that. It's the first time I've heard that one, and I like that. Thank you for that reference, and for drawing attention to the fact that most cartoon characters are single. So I mean, I can go through and think of quite a few, but yeah, when you go back to like the big stories, like the main stories, yeah, a lot of them are. Well, except for Cinderella, but a lot of the other main female characters, like leading characters, were yeah.
Only
Didn't really
children.
pay attention to that.
Well, but keep in mind, and this is no longer a distinction worth making in today's society, but at that time, Cinderella's sisters were stepsisters. So the perception would have been that they're not really her sisters. And so I suppose Ariel has some sisters, but other than Ariel, yeah, I can't think of a female Disney character, or even honestly, even most of the men are only children. I think it just becomes most animated films, especially back in the day. I don't know how old you are. I'm pushing half a century over here. So I've got a couple of digits on me now. Most animated shows are tended to be for children when we were growing up. And as a result, they were not overly complex in their storytelling. They were simple enough to tell a parable in a reasonably interesting way.
It's interesting that you say that because I know that there's a lot of I know they're meant to be simple, but going back and looking at some of these, not necessarily the really old ones, going back to like Snow White or Cinderella or some of those really old ones, but I've noticed the newer ones have deeper meanings hidden in them sometimes. Uh,
But
I
yeah,
have to go back and revisit those, like
it's
Alice in
definitely a
Wonderland.
different world. I think they also are much more likely to make them for adults now. The first time I saw Shrek was as an adult, and I could not believe how amusing I found this movie that I thought was targeted towards children, because there was jokes specifically for adults. The complexity in the storytelling was really fascinating. The casting was really diverse. I mean, everything was different than it was when I was growing up. Although I will tell you, I think the Disneyization of things before Pixar was part of what resulted in that simplicity of children's stories. Because if you go back to the Grimm brothers, whoa, they were dark and they were not necessarily simple. so I just think there was an era, and that was the era I grew up in, where this is how children's entertainment was constructed. So, and then we
Uh,
got Tom and Jerry, and it all changed.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and you're right. It did change a lot. Just sliding back into the theme here, really quick, share. How do you define procrastination and what does it mean to you personally?
I would say that is a very complex question, and I love that you've dedicated an entire pod to it. And I will say to the listeners, I love that you guys are tuning in and listening to all of the different episodes, not just mine, because there really is so many ways to just even interpret what this means. For me, I would say there's two core ways. One of them is delay of doing something because of lack of interest. And the other, and this is overly simplistic, right? Delay of doing something because of lack of interest, something urgent, even. And the second is delay of doing something, even if it's urgent or essential, due to fear. And so that's generally the instances in my life where I encounter the biggest amount of procrastination. And I find that I respond with equal amounts of procrastination to either of those, to both of those motivations, right? I'm not more likely to delay something because I'm afraid of it. If it's urgent, I'll get it done within a certain period of time. But whether it's because it's boring or I'm not interested in it, or whether it's because I'm afraid of it or anxious because of it or nervous, whatever it might be, or just find it extremely unpleasant, right? The fear-based one. I tend to take about the same amount of time. So it's really just an avoidance technique of having to deal with something that you absolutely have to deal with.
I like that. I like that definition. And we all know that there's no silver bullet or one cure fixes all, but what's been your secret sauce to overcoming procrastination?
Okay, I do have one, and it's a little cheesy, so I apologize to the audience for this. I promise that I'm a complex thinker, but it works for me. And every time face the fork in the road or the twist in the path where I can choose to procrastinate or I can choose not to procrastinate, I say this to myself and it truly works. And here's the saying, and you might have actually heard it before, and you might have actually said it on this show before, but I don't know if you have. You have to eat your frog first. Have you heard of this one? Eat your frog first?
Oh yeah, it's a very common one, but how would you explain it?
All right. All right. Chris has one up me, which I appreciate and enjoy. So I think of it as when I wake up in the morning, especially as I get older, I have to write a to-do list. I simply have to because I have an overwhelming amount of work to do. Some of it is for myself, some of it for me professionally, some of it is for me personally, some of it is for my children's academic lives, some of it is for my children's personal lives, some of it is relationship oriented, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I need to just write a to-do list, not necessarily prioritize, just write it out, everything that needs to get done today. And then maybe like go through and highlight the ones that absolutely have to get done today. Then I take a look at that list. And regardless which is more urgent, assuming there's nothing that demands my immediate attention, of course, I do the most unpleasant one because then it's done. And the whole rest of the day, I can get to the rest of these. And the thing is, even if I don't, because sometimes that unpleasant task takes you 3 times as long as you thought it would, and you don't actually get to any of your other tasks that day. So even if that happens, at least you can tell yourself, I'm going to work late tonight, or I'm going to wake up early the next day to work on things don't involve eating my frog, right? So it's much easier to motivate myself to work late or to wake up early because it's reasonably pleasant. Overall, I enjoy accomplishing tasks. Everybody does, right? You get a little dopamine rush in your brain every time you could check something off your list. So yeah, that is how I go about it.
Thank you for sharing that. I like that. Eat your frog. Has it ever eating the frog ever proven to be too much for you? Like you had to change it to eat the leg on the frog only?
Interesting, very interesting question. Of course. I mean, the answer is of course, right? There's always been times when we have either failed or given up or withdrawn or regurgitated, right? And that's also something that can happen. It can just be so disgusting that you throw it back up, right? And all of those are things that happen. I think the question you might be asking is, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is how do you prevent that from occurring, or how do you protect against that as much as possible. And it isn't always possible, right? Especially the instinct to vomit. It's not always something that is possible. Although I do find breathing through my nose and humming really helps, specifically with that particular instinct. So I do think there are things that you can do, but yeah, I think that's the difficult part. I think acknowledging that that's happened to everybody, I'm very comfortable acknowledging that. And I would say whoever isn't is either being inauthentic to themselves or being inauthentic to whomever they're speaking with.
I like that. I do like that. Actually, segues pretty good into my next question, and my audience is already rolling their eyes because they know it's coming. They know what question is going to be, and the question is.
It's going to be. So I'm very excited, audience, just so you know.
So the question is, they say that writing a book is 98% procrastination and 2% actually doing it. How true is that for you?
I would completely disagree. That is not how it worked for me. Now, I will say I wrote my first book when I had just made income partner at my law firm. I was a lawyer at that time. I practiced for almost 20 years before I started to teach. And income partner is the level right before equity partner. So it's the level before you actually get an ownership interest in your law firm, but you still get the label partner. So I'd made income partner. I was full time. It was a big firm. It was like a big international corporate transactions litigation firm. I was in the evenings, I was in a Master's of Fine Arts program in creative writing, and I was pregnant with twins. That was when I completed my first book. It wasn't published until after I delivered the twins. So if I had relied on that, now I suppose one could say that if you're a full-time writer and you have the time to waste, as some do, but if you are trying to make the best out of the precious amount of writing time that you have as a busy professional slash person who has an at-risk pregnancy slash person who's also doing a master's program, that would not be how it would work. You would not have a book. I will say that my most recent book, Stoic Empathy, which gets released on April 8th, I'm no longer a full-time professional. However, I teach almost at a full-time level, and I have 4 children now, and they demand a massive amount of time and attention. And so I would say for someone like me throughout my life, if I've ever wanted to create anything, especially a long form work versus a poem, for example, that I could write in a day, but a long form book that has to be planned out, I need to have a plan in place and dedication. I would say writing a book is 98% hard work, 2% talent. That's what I would say.
Having this other book and another book coming out, I often ask, why a book? When we have all these different mediums available to us, we've got video blogs, we've got blogs, we've got articles, we've got short form, we've got long form, we've got books, we've got plays, we've got movies. What made you choose a book as your medium?
So that is a really good question. And you mentioned earlier in my intro that I'm a TEDx producer, and TEDx talks are short films. And I've actually produced over 80 TEDx talks. So I've actually produced 80 short films. And there's a magic to film production. My next one, I'm hoping might not happen till 5 years from now, will be a full length documentary film. So there's a huge merit to that. I have definitely written plays before. A couple of my kids are actors and performers. And so it's not because I think there is greater artistic or emotional value to writing. It is because personally, I derive joy and meaning from painting pictures through words. There's something about that I find to be an extraordinarily beautiful experience, like the way my mom feels when she prepares a meal, or the way a composer feels when they write a sonata, right? Again, it could just be your kid's favorite homemade pot roast or stew, right? Or it could be one of the greatest operas humankind has ever written. Either way, if it brings you that type of joy and fulfillment, it is worth pursuing, right? At least to some extent. At least to some extent. which is why I started the first one when I didn't yet have the freedom to pursue it more full time. And so that for me is why, but I do not consider myself thus limited at all. By the way, I also paint, but I'm a terrible painter, so I don't really like to bring that up because God help me if somebody asks to see an example of my paintings, because that would be embarrassing. Um, but yeah, I think express yourself however way you can. And if they all give you joy, be versatile, right? Maya Angelou was an actress and a playwright and a producer and a poet and a novelist and a spectacular human being. Leonardo da Vinci was not only a writer and an artist, but also a painter and an inventor, right? He invented the first helicopter way before we actually built one, right? So I think it's rather extraordinary and exciting to want to pursue different things, as long as you structure them so that they are influencing one another and feeding off of one another rather than disrupting one another. Unless, again, they're disrupting one another in an inspiring way. But I do think if you have that one thing that fuels you, maybe it's baking pies, I don't know, whatever it is, do it and do it as much as you can and try to structure time for it. Because even if you can only bake your pie between 5 and 6 that morning before you head off to work, so you know that your son can have braces, right? Get up, make that pie. I mean, that's the way I try to live my life as much as possible. Maybe not every day, but most days, most days.
I like that. Thank you. Thank you for explaining that. What do you think is the most challenging aspect
Of
of putting
writing,
out a book? Of putting out a book?
putting publishing or write, those are very, very different things. I would say the most challenging aspect of writing a book is the length. Because my first book was a novel, my second book was a textbook. This new book is business slash sort of self-help, and it's part philosophy, part neuroscience. And I would say either way, if you're writing in long form, you have to intuit and be aware of hundreds of pages of your own thoughts and materials, particularly toward the end at any given time, right? At least in the beginning when you're just getting started out. Maybe you're just getting started out. You're writing a sample chapter and you're exploring something. But by the end, you now have this entire thing and every detail of it inside your head, and you can play around with it, maneuver it, revise it, edit it. And I find that to be a very exciting challenge. I will say, unlike, for example, poetry, because the most difficult thing about poetry is the emphasis on every small little word. Every word matters in a poem, not so much in a novel, right? You have a lot more room to relax a little bit. You just have to keep all that volume and storyline in your head. Publishing is a very different thing. This book, I'm with Hay House, which last year merged with Penguin Random House. And that's an industry like any other. I think writing a book is like inventing something, but getting a book published is now taking that something through the manufacturing process, through the sales process, through the marketing and PR process with no experience or knowledge or awareness of manufacturing, sales, and marketing. And so you might be a great inventor, but no one's going to benefit from your product because it's not out there in the workforce. So you try to partner with these people who know how to do that, but you are still ultimately responsible because very few people are going to want to partner with you moving forward if their investment in your product fails, right? So you could try to manufacture it yourself, which in the realm of books has become easier given the digital arena now. But of course, then you're operating business, and that is a whole host of other challenges, which might be exciting to you or might be not at all what you wanted to do when you started writing your book. So I would say those two components very, very different from one another. And the intellectual tasks involved in those are very different. And what I would say is writing a book, I have no problem not procrastinating. Promoting a book or getting my digital presence in order or, those things, doing the posts on social media, I find that very, I mean, all I ever want to do is put it off to the end of the day because it's just not what fuels me. So I find it tiresome and very frog-like and super slippery and very challenging to accomplish. That's the part. I mean, right now, honestly, I mean, I'm very, very grateful that the book is coming out to print next. I don't know when this airs, but we're recording this in early April. The book comes out April 8th. It hasn't come out yet. So either it's available on pre-order, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, or you can just go and buy it, which is great. And I'm grateful, grateful, grateful. And I can't wait till I'm writing the next one because really that's my jam. That's kind of what I want to be doing. But I also want people to benefit from this thing that I invented. I want people to eat the pie, right? That I baked. I want to share it. And that matters to me. And so as difficult as it might be to engage in the secondary part of the process, it is an essential component of the sharing. And I care about that. And so I'm in it. I'm doing my best. It's a lot of frogs right now, Chris. It's a lot.
Well, actually, isn't that one of the main sort of I guess the main sort of premises to the book, a stoic empathy? Is that
Mm-hmm.
and how it can help in all those different situations, right? But would you mind giving just a quick overview of stoic empathy?
Yeah, 100%. Thank you. So, Stoicism is the ancient philosophy, which I've modernized for readers in the book, of emotional regulation. People think of it as emotional detachment. It actually is not. It's just modern day, it would be called emotional regulation in modern day vernacular. Empathy is perhaps an overly romanticized notion of awareness of the feelings and thoughts and judgments of others. If we're able to practice stoicism, emotional regulation, we're able to exert far greater influence over ourselves. If we are able to exercise empathy, is awareness of the circumstances, either emotional awareness or cognitive awareness, we are able to exert far greater influence over the circumstances, the external circumstances. So together, Stoic empathy can give you more control over yourself and greater influence over your surroundings.
I like that. Would you be able to give us maybe a quick example of what that might even look like?
Sure. Do you want it in a corporate context or a personal one?
Either one that you think
All
is
right.
easier.
I will tell you the one that I find folks have the easiest time relating to in the personal context is parenting. There was an incident about 10 years ago. I was parenting my 4 children. They were really young at that time. And it was I got this news on the phone and it was very traumatizing. And what I wanted to do, Chris, is suddenly scream or cry or drop the phone or break a dish or kick the wall or any number of things, right? If I did that, I would be traumatizing the children, the people in the room who are more vulnerable than me, for whom I am responsible, right? They're not my best friends. They're not wise adults able to cope with their emotions. They were young children. So it was precisely my empathetic understanding of the people around me that enabled me to regulate my emotions in that moment. And by the way, I still had to communicate this message. I couldn't hide it from the children. Maybe not in that instant, but it had to be, they had to know, be aware of it, right? Because it was a death. It was something that they were going to have to accept. So when I talk about this, I'm not talking about lacking transparency. What I'm talking about is allowing your understanding of the people around you to assist you in the modulation of your behavior. Here's another example. You are a trauma counselor. My sister works at a refugee camp. You are a trauma counselor working at a refugee camp, encountering victims of mass rape. You cannot allow yourself, obviously, you're a human being, you're going to have to be somewhat emotionally impacting by your experiences. But if you really want to stay in that job for more than a minute and serve these individuals, right, the way I want to serve my children, you need to know how to regulate your emotions, right? Now, put it in a hostile example. I'm a kid on the streets of Iran I grew up in Iran and I was there till I was 11. And there are many instances where we came up against the morality guard on the streets of Iran. Really scary Russian assault style rifles. I'm a kid and a scrawny one at that. So these people seem huge to me. They're probably normal sized. And they're imposing Islamic dress code, which I routinely did not follow. And I have to make sure I don't get arrested, or I'm too young and not wise enough or street smart enough to maneuver my way around it. So my parent, my father, my mother, has to make sure that I don't get arrested. And they can't do it by throwing their own power around. They can only do it by finding a way to relate to this human being and changing their mind, because they don't have enough power to throw around in this scenario, right? Not in that scenario. And their child's life is at risk. So it's not something they're willing to risk, right? So there's three examples. They're all in personal lives, right? But two of them are examples of compassion, whereas one of them is not. You don't necessarily need to have compassion or develop a meaningful connection with the morality officer. But if you understand where they're coming from and why they're frustrated, you'll be able to craft your language in a way that makes it easier to influence them. So then in a corporate context, think about leadership. You are a manager or a CEO or an executive or just leading a team, and you find out something. The supply component is not available. The customer terminated his relationship with your company, the whatever it might be. And again, you can't hide it from your team. However, you also can't go to your team scream. I mean, you could, and some people do, but you can't go to your team screaming bloody murder. We're all screwed. We lost this customer. You might as well all jump off the Brooklyn Bridge. I mean, that's probably not the way you should be leading your team. So you have to find a way to communicate the message precisely because you're responsible for that team. Their jobs depend on you, right? And this is America, so jobs mean health insurance. So it's possible their sick kids' health insurance depends on you, right? It's not a joke. There's a lot of pressure on your shoulders in order to manage the situation. And it doesn't mean you'll necessarily get it right, but you should at least try. So that's what Stoic Empathy is about. It's about finding these different applications, whether they're in the corporate world, in the professional world, in the sales world, or in the parenting world, or in the trying to get out of being arrested by the morality police, to enable you to maneuver your way through the situation, utilizing precisely the stoicism that helps you regulate your emotions, which in fact, in that moment, assists your ability to remain the rationality necessary to maintain empathic awareness instead of being overwhelmed by your own feelings.
Such a powerful explanation. Thank you for sharing that. Cher, it's been a really great conversation. I could probably go on for like another 2 or 3 hours on this, but
I
I
know.
know that I know that you got places to be. I want to be respectful of that. We are coming up pretty close to time. Is there anything that you wish I would have asked but didn't ask, or anything you feel we should have covered but didn't cover?
Yeah, I would say nothing that I wish you would have asked, but there is one more thing I wish to say. I would say, for those of you who are listening to this, your empathy, your awareness of the people around you can take different forms, right? The form of empathy the trauma surgeon has towards the gunshot victim that is wheeled into his ER is quite different and much more emotionally controlled than the type of empathy you have towards your child whose heart was just broken. And it's okay. And you're permitted to have these differences as long as the understanding and the awareness remains. You remain engaged in the act of empathy, and you can use the Stoic training, right? The control over yourself, the emotional regulation, the use of you between space and stimuli, right? If we have space here, we have, stimuli here and response here. If you have stimuli here and response here, and in between is the space that is you, right? How you use this, you utilize Stoicism as much as possible to make the right decision about how to show up in that scenario. Do I show up far more emotionally? Do I show up far more cognitively? Right. And I'm not a robot, so I can't dictate the way I respond to this. But there is that space between stimuli and response. It exists. I can call it my mind, I can call it my soul, I can call it my willpower, I can call it my stoic control. At the end of the day, we want to improve that component of ourselves while maintaining the significance of continuing to show up every day, albeit in different ways for different people.
Wow, such a powerful note to end the show on. Thank you so much for being here today, Cher. It was a real pleasure. Just before we go, what is the best way for our listeners to reach out and touch base or ask a question?
I appreciate it. I will tell you, I pour myself out in my work. So reading the work would mean a lot to me. If you are the click the button because you're busy and you need Amazon to deliver it to your house, that's cool, man. It's on Amazon. If you are the I want to buy local and go to my local bookstore and support local, that's cool too. You can do that as well. It should be available everywhere. I would be honored, really, by the ability to share this work. I will say, if you want to reach out directly, I am on LinkedIn. I do get to my messages. Sometimes it takes a few weeks, but I do always respond to a message. I don't really take personal meetings through LinkedIn, but I will respond. So feel free to reach out. I apologize if it takes a while. Hang in there.
And to all our listeners, don't worry, we are going to have a bunch of other links for you as well. That all the good stuff and all the socials, and you'll be able to find that in the show notes. Thank you once again for being on the show today, Cher, and to all our listeners, thank you once again for tuning in. And just remember, if you can't find that inspiration or motivation for yourself today, maybe just go out and try to be that motivation and inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.